to spare you some time from sitting here, we're going to start discussing the Policy Advisory Council. This is a committee, this is a special meeting, but it's also a committee meeting of the whole, which allows for, if we have any questions or anything from that. So Kevin, you want to talk about this?
Well, let's go to Policy 8:90. This is parent organizations and booster clubs. And I think, without speaking on behalf of Mr. Welch, a majority of his questions were coming off of the policy that's in place that talks about some rules and requirements that the board has in their current policy, which is from September 9th of 2008. What I think I would recommend to the board, and based off our discussions tonight, we can then take this to my advisory council to draft out some additions to this policy, and then maybe bring it back in May or early June to vote on. But I know the groups had asked that if there's any specific changes that would directly impact them, that we try to have this in place by the end of May, so that they have the month of June to prepare before residency in July, so that they know how to recruit members and to post their information and to work with the administration. I think you've heard tonight that some effort was made on the administration and the leadership of these groups to try to come up with some compromises in regards to how we can support each other. I think the thing that was going on, and this is something that I've said a lot in the last 8 months or 9 months of my tenure as a superintendent, this is one of those things that's unique to RB, and that we need to kind of clean up in a sense of trying to establish some consistent guidelines and procedures that all of our parent groups follow. So I think, the board can help the administration do that by establishing some clear guidelines in this policy of, you need to maybe have a 501c3 on file with the district. You need to have your own website that lists some of the questions that Mr. Welch asked, maybe if we establish them in this policy to where there's 5 or 6 requirements to be recognized as an outside parent group or organization, and they have a checklist that they maybe meet with annually with the superintendent, we can go from there. In regards to the gate receipts and the activity passes that the foundation was giving out, we provided, Mr. Walsh had asked for a 3-year historical. I had just this year's. So our historical information, I was able to gather that. Mary Ann gave that out as a walk, and I also sent it via email today as we tried to pull that together for the board. Art Ostro also sent out just a general question to the 300 schools in the 350 schools in the IHSA of others, what schools are using activity passes or selling activity passes, and how does your district handle them, just as a general feeler, so the board can have some reference of how different schools are doing it. We had 35 responses, and this was done back around December. So Art put those in a chart for you. Although I recognize the amount of work that went into this and having some historical data, I think there's really, this is more of a local decision for us. No matter what schools I bring forward to the board or the history of the gate receipts, I think you've heard that the overall intent of these groups is to help RB. So I think tonight what I need direction from the board is we need to consider, is something as maybe the $5,000 or $7,000 we might lose in gate receipts worth harming the relationship and the work that the boosters do for the high school? Taking away the activity pass from the telethon donations, is that something that we want to harm with the foundation and what they give back to the high school? I think based on our conversations that we had last week, we can establish some things to maybe where we do, like we said, a reduced ticket price so that the district receives some revenue, and then this in turn can help them. I know the boosters were concerned about the price of their admission to become a booster club member. Now that pay to participate has gone up to $200 a sport. The other concern they had is that there's only 5 or 6 events that sell tickets or admission to events. The rest are free. So a lot of the parents might not join the booster club because they say, hey, my kid's sport doesn't have, you don't have to buy tickets to go to it, so why do I need to pay the $50? I could just help support when they do a fundraiser. So what we're trying to do is work with them to establish something to where, as you heard tonight, they give back to a lot of the programs, not just the programs that have gate receipts. So if we found a way to help them lower their booster club rate to become a booster club member, and in turn, maybe that got you a reduced ticket price, but we were still getting some revenue at the gate, and that was one thing that we had discussed with the boosters. Ultimately, I think it's the board's decision on how they want to proceed with this, but that's kind of my take on it.
So is the direction, and Tim, you're working on the policy. You know, I saw the charts, I didn't see the policy, but are we going to split them apart? Are we going to talk about the policy and some of those questions that Mike asked, you know, some of those 501,
Mary Ann,
3C and that, and then the gate receipts or something separate, not part of policy?
Hold on for a minute.
Pam has I think Mary Ann has a copy of 890, so if anybody needs it.
Okay. I have a copy of it.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Laura.
I mean, they seem like two separate issues.
And I have another issue. As you know, I've always been drilling true cost of what goes on here. And, you know, I did it with the summer school. I did it with art on what it's costing to run tournaments here. Do we have a true accounting of the cost of the telethon, and has that been done in a manner? And then do we have these organizations signed a rental agreement with us to formalize things into some kind of formalization manner?
My immediate response to that would probably not. And even as I'm hearing some of the answers with them tonight, and I think that attests to what I've been working, and the board knows I've been working on over the last 8 or 9 months, is trying to create some clear procedures so that someone on staff can't say, hey, just go ahead and use the postage meter. You know, that should be something that's, you know, coming off with the written consent of the superintendent, that if you need to send out postage, you know, that the superintendent's cleared it with the board, or is identified an account that will cover those expenses. I don't think that's been occurring. I think it's just been happening. So to answer your question of it, are there true costs of how much it costs to run the TV studio for that day, or to have maintenance on staff to clean up after that, I don't think any of that's been done through a formal process, to my recollection.
And then do we need to formalize into a agreement with these organizations for use of the building? I'm just, you know,
Well,
I'm not that well versed in the policy, so I'll claim ignorance, but should we have some kind of formal?
Well, we have in our rental agreement that we're working on still with our facilities council, it's in place, and we're set to meet at the end of May to start working on that for the July 1st fiscal year. But it does clearly establish that a booster club and a direct organization is a group one, and there should be no additional charges.
Well, I'm not asking to charge.
Right, but I'm saying I don't think they've ever filled out the formal rental agreement. I'm not, to my knowledge. Maybe they have, just to reserve
To reserve rooms.
a
They might have
room.
filled out a room usage.
Yeah, I mean, room usage, but I don't know if they did the formal. And even with that formal, I think we've asked some good questions tonight, like having a 501c3 on file and making sure maybe they have a certificate of insurance, you know, a rider, some of those things. I mean, as your superintendent, hearing that in the past they thought the golf outing was part of the school's insurance when it's off-site and there's alcohol, and we don't want that to be tied. That should be something separate as their own organization with their own insurance covering that.
Okay, so I'll defer to the policy committee to formalize what you guys want to do with the clubs.
Well, I think that,
But I would think the telethon, we probably should get something more formal, right?
Yeah.
Because it's big, okay. And then, if you're still talking about the cost side of it, then for gifts, I know we have a policy out there for the gift side of it. Should that be approved by the board or not? I don't know. I'll defer it again to the policy committee, because
there's a conflict between what it says about gift giving under the 890 and the 880. That's right,
Right.
Gary. We have to resolve 880 and 890 when we do this. So, and I guess other people, one says that you can't, a booster club can't restrict the gift they give, and the other one says that if it's restricted, the board has to approve it.
Right.
So we need to look about that. We don't want to approve every set of
Right.
uniforms, I don't think, if that's what the booster's donating, but
Can
I
I
was
just-
going to go to the cost, but to Laura's
On the finance
first.
for 1 sec, I think you bring up a good point in regards to, like, we spent a lot of time even on the capital audit, and I think it's a good idea that when we do this policy, we have something in there so that I can say, so that says that all those donations go through the departments, whether it's in reimbursement, so it's going through our procurement process, and so that it's being accounted for in our capital audit if needed, and it's being tagged and identified, and so that would help us, and then it would help future boards as well as if you ever do another audit or another assessment. So I appreciate that. Tim, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to go to Laura's question first. I think there's two parts to it, Laura. One is on the policy, how are we going to how are we going to decide how we're going to recognize? And I think, I'll guess Mike's going to recommend that they have to be a 501c3. So maybe we want to put something in this. Now, recognize, we did look at other schools, and this is the one we get from the ISBA. And, this is what they recommend here. But, so I think we need to look at that. How are we going to decide who we'd recognize as a group? And then I suggest, and Gary's is the second part of it, assuming we recognize these groups because it appears they're all 501c3 and they meet the other characteristics, and we've been recognizing them for decades, then you have to go and look at, well, what's the finance? And, one thing I talked about, I'd even suggest, even like insurance, I suggest before we decide insurance is a requirement at our facilities. The golf outing away from here is different because we don't have insurance there probably, if it's not our staff and students. But, if we talk to our insurance broker, we might find there's no additional cost to us or risk to us to allow groups to come in and use our insurance, where it might cost a small group like this a few $1,000s to insure themselves. So we're, in essence, going to take away money that they are collecting and then returning back to the students and staff, and there's no offset, there's no advantage to the school because we might not have to pay additional insurance. I mean, we certainly got to be careful we do that, because then you have to think about, well, are you going to make everybody who comes into this building have an insurance policy? And maybe we do, but we should think about that as just a general matter. And the second part of it is, and I talked to Kevin, we've talked about this, is, and one reason I asked for the history, I mean, if you look at the receipts, I mean, overall they've gone up over the last 3 years, and I asked them to do the other two because this is a little bit of an oddity in the year because of how we started without the cards this year. But, I mean, some sports have gone up, some have gone down. I presume football is a little dependent on how many home games we have. I didn't count them, but I assume that's what it is. And, I mean, at the end of the day, if we take money that was, say, going to the boosters or was going to the patrons or was going to the education foundation, that they're turning around and giving back to us on things we're going to spend money on anyway, is there really a net gain to the school? And I think that's one thing that we have to give a lot of consideration. I mean, so what I would suggest is, it sounds like you've had some good conversations with groups, is to, leave it to Kevin to go, work something out with each group of how it's going to work. Don't have overlap, so that two people are selling tickets for or maybe have overlap, I don't know, whatever you think's working. As far as the finance part of it, work something out that's acceptable to the three groups. And, independently, we'll work out what the policy is going to be, which would include, I think, I'll let Mike speak for himself, but, pretty much like it is here, but that, we're going to probably require them to be a 501c3. We may require them to have the insurance, which we require other people who rent, if that's how we're going to do a rental agreement. So that's what I think they're a little bit two separate issues that we need to look at.
I think that one of the key things on the policy driver on this is the 501c3 and everything is to really promote transparency. and requirement to make sure that you're not going to have a 501c4 listed out there, or officers, we're going to, stuff like that. Make sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, and also put the lines of this is what you can't do. So you can't go up and say, hey, you're running a postage or whatever you're going to do from that side. Being able to keep that line in place, saying, here, you are a separate parent organization. This is your fundraiser, or this is what you have to do. These are your costs tied with it. I do think that the policy should be addressing that for transparency, and I also think too that with that transparency there has to be some law. So 501c3, you have to look at bylaws and officers, and stuff like that, to be able to have that on file. Looking at the insurance, like you said before, and then also looking at, should there be a formalized agreement once or every 2 years between the groups, so that it's a checkoff point to make sure that everything's all set and everything's done, just because they are representing the school itself, and delineating from there. So I think that on the policy, I think, Tim, I think we're on the same path a little bit, and I think that the key thing I think the policy needs to do is just set up, this is what we're looking for from a parent organization, and not try to micromanage them, but just be able to set some guidelines to keep that transparency.
Because this policy is, a lot based on their bylaws, which in my search of, without asking the organization for their bylaws, my search doesn't show up the bylaws. And, the insurance question is not that I want to mandate that they have insurance. Obviously, if they go to the golf course, you probably need something out there if anyone's ever been to a golf outing. But, one of these statements say that the bylaws should have a statement that the district is not and will not be responsible for the organization's or the club's business or the conduct of its members. So if the conduct of the members caused an accident, what's going to take place? How are we going to get that parent volunteer to the hospital and make sure that they know that the medical bills are going to be taken care of? That's kind of, in a governance sense, what I think we need to look for in that insurance area. If everything is procured through the high school and they're just helping supplement the purchase, then I think that takes care of the insurance side, where it would be on our asset rolls and things like that. And I agree that, a 501c3 comes with a great responsibility, and a great responsibility to disclose everything that they've got going on, because they're basically a public charity, and then donations to them become tax deductible. And so that's why some of the questions I was asking for earlier, are you going to post things on your website? They should have their annual filings, even though they're available on GuideStar. They should have their application and their letter of acceptance, and they should have some of their financials, and is going as detailed as to what's appropriate. We should be setting some type of guidelines in that area. Without telling them exactly what they have to do. I went back and looked at 5 or 6 years worth of board meeting minutes, and I don't think these organizations have ever come to present to the board as, I don't know if that's a fair statement or not, but I've never seen where they came in and said, what they're doing, or, we're complying with this policy. This policy here came in the mass policy in September 9, 2008. And I want to make sure that this school is covered if something should happen. So that's where the insurance questions were, and that the one of them says that a statement that the membership is open and unrestricted. So I don't even know where some of these organizations meet. So those kind of questions just kind of laid the foundation for the discussion as to we're going to allow these partners in our building with us using our name and logos and everything. Let's just make sure that we've done the right thing to allow this to happen, and we have the proper policy in place that is not in conflict with another policy, and that and does what's best for us as a governing board.
I have a statement about this. We have about 4 pages of different schools' representative boosters clubs. And maybe this is a rhetorical question, but is there a general practice among all of these boosters clubs that would show them to have the proper relationship to the school that we're proposing?
Most of the.
Are these mostly 501c3 organizations?
The policy.
Kind of loose? Yeah.
The policy council, when this first came up back in the fall, we pulled a few school districts. Most of the school districts are following the 890 that we have in place and that the IASB recognizes.
So
They don't have a
most of them haven't proposed the kind of discipline in our relationship that we are. So,
In our initial research that we found.
yeah. So we're setting a standard.
Right.
But I got to tell you, the only thing that I would say maybe a little different than what Matt and Mike saying is, in order to be a 501c, you have to be a nonprofit or a corporation in a state somewhere. In both cases, you have to have officers. You have to, 501c3, you have to have bylaws. You have to have bylaws that state certain things. So I'm a little, I don't have a big problem with doing a 501c3, especially since we know our 3 organizations do it, because it also provides liability protection for them, which probably would help us a little. But I'm a little reluctant to, talk about what they have to put on their website and et cetera, how they should manage their organization. But Mike's right. I mean, we said in order for them to do it, they have to at least have this in their bylaws. So in order for us to approve them, we have to make sure they adhere to whatever we end up being the last version of this. So I would be more like, they meet the requirements similar to here. If we want to say 501c3, they all have it. That shouldn't be a great problem to them. But I'm a little reluctant to go further in how they should manage their websites and what they should put on their websites and how they should make their tax forms available. But might be a little more to say what we want to see. I mean, if there's things you want to see, but in order for you to approve them or review it annually or something like that, versus how they should run their organization to the public.
Yeah, I would
To reduce the
I would
onerous
agree that
burden.
we can't dictate what they want to do on our website. However, maybe in this very approval process or this form that we fill out annually, not to be cumbersome to them and not to look for an additional cost for them, but maybe that checklist would be that they have to include their tax returns or
I was going to say
whatever.
previous year's filing as well
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
proof of their 501c3
And their
status.
bylaws, and see that they're good standing with the state of,
True.
that they're, and
Their documents are open to the public by being a 501c3.
Sure.
So they can, just like our high school documents are, that you can post them on there and prevent the step from having to copy them later for whoever wants to look at them.
All right, any other questions on this?
Yeah,
Discussions?
I have 3. So Tim, I don't have a comment about, it's the sentence, 3rd from the bottom. It said the superintendent shall designate an administrative staff member to serve as liaison to the parent organizations. I don't know if we have to have that. I don't think we have that now. They work with us. Do we need to have that in policy? I don't know if you want to discuss that. I don't think, Kevin, we have a designated liaison now, do we?
Yes, Pam is the booster club,
Okay.
or excuse me, Pam is the patrons council, Art is the booster club. I meet with Joanne in regards to the alumni achievement and some of the stuff related to the foundation as well as Pam.
Oh, so we already have that?
Yes.
Okay. And then, so in our conversation, did we decide or did we make it clear that the money at the gate would be a procedural, something that you would bring back a recommendation, not part of the policy?
I think it should state in the policy that, something general that maybe they don't receive a extreme benefit or for extra fringe benefit, but I think my recommendation is going to align similar to what Tim brought up is I think between myself and the presidents of each of these organizations, we could work out whether or not they pay full price or half price at the gate, as long as they're considered an established group. Just like we do in the rental agreement, that if they're an established group, basically, we could put in our new rental agreement, if they qualify under 890 and they're an established group, then they would qualify as Group 1 under the rental agreement. So I don't think we need to put specifics in regards to gate receipts in the policy. But, you know, that's the direction of the board. But
Or put something more general, like the superintendent will be, or administrative content, be responsible for some arrangement with the group that's acceptable to the board or
Or an
something like
annual
that.
review that he presents or something.
I would not get into how we would split cost or sell cards or whatever, because then if it changed, you have to revise the policy every time. You usually don't want to do that.
I mean, my preference would be that that would be a procedure, that
Oh,
the
right.
that the policy should be as minimal as necessary.
So, yeah, we'll consider that, and we'll consider Mike's, and we're going to put a draft together, and everybody's going to have a chance to look at it and see if they like it or not.
I saw some ears perk up in the audience when Dan mentioned the 4-page Booster Club item, which is on the website under the Board of Education, under meetings, under meeting packet, I'm starting on page 36, if you wanted to see what he was talking about.
And I was going to ask you a question about that, Kevin. The one thing that a lot of the schools have is they say, you know, activity passes are sold by the athletic department. Is that something you're considering also?
No, we thought, I haven't finalized my recommendation on that. My thought was that we would try to reach some type of agreement with our organizations and try not to sell separate passes and just let people buy the gate receipts
Okay.
and come in at the reduced price for a year. I don't want to then get into a competition of, oh, do I buy the school's activity pass or do I join the boosters?
Okay.
And so my thoughts were we could probably hold off on that for a year, try maybe this reduced ticket price thing to where if you're joining the booster clubs, maybe you pay $2 instead of $5 or $4, whatever it is. And we see it, and this way we're getting some revenue, they're helping recruit members, and we're not. Most of the school districts I have been at, that has been the practice, the district sells the activity pass, and then they keep the revenue from it.
Okay.
That's why it was one of the things that kind of brought my attention to it was, you know, that the boosters were selling the activity passes and they were getting all the revenue from it.
And we sell a student activity pass at registration for the students too, right? A separate one, Pam?
Right,
Is that good for all the sporting events?
yeah, it gets them into
Okay.
the sporting events and.
And that money goes to
Not-
It's-
our student activities account.
Yeah, not tournaments, IHSA
Okay.
tournaments.
Are there any other questions on this?
Yeah, I'd want to.
Okay.
She had, didn't she?
Do you have another?
Go ahead, John, I just have a comment.
What Laura was saying, perhaps part of this policy would be part of your annual review. We could discuss that item. And I like the idea of having them come up once a year, whatever, and just present what they did or what they're doing.
Sure.
Yeah, my comment, looking at the receipts, this chart, I'm a little concerned that we don't nickel and dime the families, because we have increased the pay-to-play, we've increased payment for clubs, we've increased student fees. You know, and so if our parents buy the memberships, you know, when I look at, you know, like gymnastics, they only took in 324. I just think about being a parent of swimmers, we never had to pay to watch a dual meet, but we paid for multi-school meets. If I had to pay for every dual meet I came to, I wouldn't have been able to come to all those meets, you know, because it's $2 here, $2, $5, $10. So I would hope that we're not going to, you know, that we look at the bigger picture, and that we're not always, you know, grabbing for $2, grabbing for $5, $10, something like that. That's just my comment.
Any other?
And you're probably going to say, no, you don't have an answer to this, but based on the revenues generated, how much would you think came from the visitor side of the equation versus, yeah, I know you're going to say, I don't know, but
I don't.
part of this
Look at the
revenue
foot-
receipts is visitor
Visitors.
receipts.
If you look at a football game, how many more people are over in the home stands versus the visitors?
But I think what he's asking is, do we have a specific ticket count to how many came from one gate or another gate? I think that's something we might want to put.
I don't
in
want to
place.
burden it, but, I mean, part of this analysis would be, you know,
Right.
how much is visitor
Sure.
generated? You know, even from the, you know, the basketball side, the wrestling
I think,
receipts.
yeah, and then the other thing is that the boosters acknowledge, as well as myself, and as well as the RBEF, that those passes have gotten kind of lax to where it was just like almost a business card, and there was really no ID number on that card to see, or, you know, people were buying one booster membership, and it was allowing maybe 6 family members into a game, and so we talked even about trying to establish some clear guidelines, like, hey, if you're a booster member and you buy this membership, it will get you and 2 guests in for a reduced rate, or you and 3 guests, you know. We wanted to clean that up, and I think that's what we started to lay the foundation for last week.
All right, anything else?
So where does this, is it going to sit until you work out a relationship with,
What I would,
something with the three?
what I would ask is that we would try it in the next week before our business meeting, is I will call, we're gonna talk about something with finance, and then also call policy, as I have scheduled, or tentative on the calendar. I'd like to get the policy in place first, and if the policy allows the superintendent to work with these groups to identify, you know, those types of relationships or negotiations, then I can go forward from there and establish those with them. And then I can report back to the board. Right now, in regards to the boosters in the RBEF, I'm thinking of trying to come up with something blanket to the fact of, if you give this, and we would make their donation similar to the donation that we're making for the Booster Club, but something where that would give you some type of identification that would get you in for a reduced rate. And then we would keep that reduced rate similar for both groups, so that we're not trying to manage 3 different agreements with the 3 different groups.
Any other questions? All right, we're gonna go back to policy on the other one, and let's just go back on to, so you, all the parent organizations, you can go home if you wanna stay until whenever, we can just do that. So let's go,
Can you collect the bylaws and put them out in a weekly packet so we can take a look at them as you talk with these parent groups?
What I'm wondering is, I think, what I think might be a cleaner process is that if we establish a policy that says they maybe have to have a copy of their bylaws on file.
On the website, then we can just go get them.
So then we would wipe out all the stuff that needs to be in the bylaws?
Well, though, I think in this policy, I think there's a couple things we would want to say that must require in your bylaws, something that shows at no time does the district accept responsibility, some of those things. But I think we should set the policy first and then have them reconstruct their bylaws to align with our policy.
Still
Well,
like
let's
to see
assume
them.
for a sec, I mean, I actually think Mike's got a point. I mean, technically, they're supposed to adhere to this policy already.
Sure.
Because we do recognize it.
so can you, this get
So it'd
copies
be
of the.
helpful for, at least, if Mike wants a copy, but maybe for everybody offered to have them. It'd be helpful when we revise the policy to know that whether our groups are gonna fit in it or not. I mean, I'm not saying we should make our policy depend, you know, like, alter it in different ways to let everybody slide in there, but these are kind of general provisions that you would expect anyway. And they said they all have bylaws, so we could quickly review them for the policy council to say, do the current groups meet what we have in place and what we're planning, whatever changes we're planning
I
to
can
make.
definitely request it.
Yeah, okay.
All right, then we're gonna,
On that, I'd just like the onus of the organizations
to
to have like a checkoff saying, we are adhering to the district's policy,
Right.
these are specifically. So if we just have to do this annual ante-up type of policy, they are acknowledging that their bylaws are following this.
okay.
That's a good.
I don't want the district to have to scrutinize the bylaws every year. Put the onus on them.
And the policy also has a Title IX requirement.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. I think we need to make sure that the policy helps govern what I put in my administrative procedures. And although it's great that we might be donating something to boys soccer of $5,000 in the fall, we got to make sure that we're giving the same thing
Right.
to girls soccer. You know, so that's why we have to make sure that they understand that, because it might go.
And then I guess the bigger thing is the RB Education Foundation, which they don't give money to us. So how can they give money directly to, right, it's my understanding of it, tell me, to the teacher or to a student?
That was something, Gary.
How can we, in essence, it's violating our policy because we're saying it can't be restricted.
We had talked a little bit with them. That was my concern, looking at them and having the activity pass for their general donation, is that for the most part, a majority of their contributions go back to individual students, very small groups, or individual teachers. Where the booster clubs, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, is hey, we're arguing or we're discussing $5,000 or $7,000 in gate receipts, but they gave $40,000 over to winter athletics. So we had talked with the foundation of that on an annual basis. We would try to identify something that maybe we would fill out a grant application on an annual basis so that they can make an in-kind donation back to the high school that benefits the entire student population on an annual basis. If they were going to do some type of activity pass or something of that nature.
Yeah, I'd like to see that formalized a little better than the way it's done now. Because,
Absolutely, I would agree.
I mean, I think it's kind of I think it's violating our policy. And maybe you could work with them further because of this restricted portion of their fund. That is that in conflict with?
That's why I question whether they may or may not truly be a 501c3, where they may be recognized as an organization described in 501c3 as opposed to being actually an organization recognized under 501c3, because they have these earmarkings that, and I'm not an attorney or a tax expert in this area, it sounds like more like a foundation where they have a specific purpose for this money, that maybe they're not just a general.
You know, I've gone to the awards thing, and the way I understand it, and I'm not even a member, is there's, like they said, they've had bequeaths, and the people want to leave the money to give scholarships to students at RB. So now they actually probably need a 501c3 organization in order to get that, to manage it, and the families have asked this group to manage these funds that are fitting into the same realm of what they want to do to grant scholarships, and they said there were 4. That sounds right. So I mean, I'm writing down what people are saying. We'll have to talk about it.
Yeah, whatever it truly is, that's what it is.
So to bring up the foundation, they're a unique group. When they come to the scholarship banquet or for the students, and they do have, like the number of scholarships, money that was bequeathed, and they give them out. But then they also grant money, Gary, like to a student who wants to take this course or go to this conference or something. So that student would get money to go. So how would that kind of?
But as opposed to the patrons council who said, oh, we're not going to do a field trip. Patron steps in, gives the money to the school, who then funds the field trip.
Right, that's why this is different. Like, we've had students who wanted to participate in an art competition and they couldn't fund that, so they went to the foundation and they received the money. They filled out the application, they received the money to do that. So they are unique in that way. Do we, want to?
But our policy says that we can't restrict it. Right, I mean,
Well,
so I know they're not giving it to the district, but yet we're sponsoring this organization who now has the freedom to go and do things that kind of, if I'm reading to the letter of law, and I'm not, and all I'm asking the policy committee to do is review it, look it over, see if there's a conflict, the way that organization is structured to what we're trying to accomplish in this policy. And if there is, and there's a way we can resolve it with a new policy, so be it. I'm not trying to take away what they're about. All I want to do is make sure it's in.
That's fine.
So.
Yeah, we might have to look at that, see if we can look about it, because they really are such a different entity, an unusual entity.
Right. And the other side of it is the cost side, which I raised, and
Right.
how we're gonna